Coalition forces in Yemen are preparing for what many believe will be the final push towards the capital. Thousands of troops have been gathering in Marib, east of Sanaa. But could a possible ground operation succeed where the air operation did not? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. A coalition of Arab countries has intensified attacks on Houthi rebels in Yemen in a bid to take back the capital Sanaa. Coalition jets have targeted Houthi positions in Marib as well. Sanaa in some of the heaviest shelling of the six-month air campaign. It follows a difficult week for Gulf forces in which around 60 soldiers were killed in a Houthi attack, the worst ever loss of life suffered by the region's troops. In the wake of that attack, Qatar deployed around 1,000 soldiers to Yemen. They joined thousands more from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the UAE, who are fighting alongside forces loyal to exiled President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi. The war in Yemen has had a devastating impact on civilians. The fighting has been going on for around a year since Houthi rebels took control of the capital Sanaa. President Hadi and his government resigned in protest at the Houthi takeover in January, and a month later Hadi fled to Aden and then to Saudi Arabia. A Saudi-led coalition began its bombing campaign in March, and in July the exiled president announced what he called the liberation of the port city of Aden. Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in Doha is Andreas Krieg, a strategic risk analyst and assistant professor at the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. In Riyadh, we had Ahmed Alibrahim, a political and security analyst who specialises on Saudi Arabia. And in London, Abubakr Al-Shamahi, a British-Yemeni journalist at al-Araby al-Jadeed. Welcome to you all. Let's begin in the studio here with Andreas Krieg. It would appear that there is now a realization in Riyadh and among those in the coalition that this war cannot be won from the air?
Correct. I think the realization has been very early on. Already in March and April, people were saying this could be very, very difficult in a complex operating environment such as Yemen to merely rely on air power. And I think there's now been a realization, not just in Riyadh, but in all the coalition capitals, that we need to use ground forces in order to not just destroy targets, but particularly to seize territory and hold territory. And this is something that can only be done with from the ground and not from the air.
Well, Ahmed Alibrahim, is there an awareness of the dangers involved of putting boots on the ground in a complex situation as it is in Yemen?
Definitely, it comes with a lot of liability. I mean, we call Yemen the graveyard of all wars. So it will be very difficult to put some boots on the ground, especially with the tribal of Yemen, the tribes, and all this social breakdown on the geographic, and also the mountains and the hindrance that the army is going to go through that they are not used to win this battle. However, what I think with the new technology and how the coalition forces are actually advancing up to this date, and we all know since day one that this war cannot be won by the sky. It has to be boots on ground. I'm sure they went with a very strategic plan to win this war on the ground, but it comes with a lot of casualties.
Well, Abubakr Al-Shamahi, the shelling in recent days has been ferocious in the wake of the killings of so many coalition soldiers. Many would argue that this is counterproductive, creating anti-feeling to the coalition forces on the ground. Would you agree?
I think it does obviously create more negative feelings towards the coalition, but as part of the wider scheme of things, I don't think that necessarily will have much of an effect, because the north of the country is naturally more sympathetic to the Houthis and to Ali Abdullah Saleh anyway, whether the coalition would have shelled Sanaa or not. But the other side of that is that there are always going to be groups in these areas who are anti-Houthi and anti-Saleh, and will be working and will consider that the Houthis and Saleh are the greater evil in this, so they'll always be willing to fight. I think the real issue that arises out of this shelling is the number of civilian deaths, and whether the end result for the Saudi-led coalition, for the government of Yemen in exile, is worth those civilian deaths or not.
Well, Andreas Krieg, on that particular aspect, I mean, some 2,000 people are estimated to have been killed. There's some 21 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. So throughout this conflict, you are creating a society in which there are going to be a multitude of problems that are not just political ones, if there is any kind of solution.
That's very true. The humanitarian situation is dire. It has been dire now for months. Yemen is anyway one of the poorest countries in the Arab world, one of the poorest countries in the world. And we see now the destruction of infrastructure, which was absolutely necessary in order to try to contain the spread of the Houthi rebels, has definitely exacerbated the situation on the ground. But we have to say there weren't many options that the coalitions could have taken in order to make the situation less severe. They've been trying everything they could in order to get humanitarian aid in. The situation is unfortunately very complex, and both sides, particularly the Houthi rebels and loyalists of Ali Abdullah Saleh, really obstructed the delivery of humanitarian aid.
Well, Ahmed Alibrahim, one of the aspects that has been made a brief mention of there is the geographical split within the country. The coalition forces have been fairly successful in the south, but moving into the north and advancing on the capital, Sanaa, they are moving into territory that is far more hostile, are they not?
Oh, definitely. And I don't think the amount of the coalition that they are putting on the ground is enough. I think in the coming weeks or probably days, you're going to see more boots on the ground. They estimate there is 10,000 soldiers right now on the ground. I think this number needs to be more. The closest example is we can think about is the U.S. Freedom of Iraq, which has happened in 2003, and they probably positioned around 200 to 300,000 soldiers on the ground. I think it's need more than that to clean up Yemen from the Houthis, and I think in the coming days you will see a lot of commitments from new countries to be deployed into Yemen.
Well, Abubakr Al-Shamahi, there we had the comparison to the U.S. operation in Iraq with the surge. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were moved in there. Are the coalition facing that type of scenario, a mission creep as it is described, getting into a situation where they have to put more people in to actually ensure the safety of their troops or even to get them out?
I think ideally for the coalition, the operation in Yemen would have been a Yemeni-led operation, and that's immediately encountered problems which were quite evident from the start, which was the lack of any group in Yemen or any real faction in Yemen they could rely upon. The southerners who they relied upon to fight in the south, in Aden, and who liberated Aden as such, were very adamant that they were not going to go and fight in the north. So instead they've had to go and rely on a totally separate force in the north. The problem of a lack of a suitable ally on the ground will face them, even if they do go into Sanaa, even if they do are able to take the city. What about the aftermath? Who then do they hand over to, who will have the power to take over not just the north, but also the south? You know, we can't forget the fact that a large section of the south now is dominated by separatists. They're the ones who fought in the south, and they're the ones who are going to remain adamant that they will not give up what they see as now their almost newfound state.
There's a couple of issues I will return to there, but immediately, Andreas Krieg, we had mentioned there is nobody within the country that could be relied on and possible allies. Now, we have an even more layered and complex situation in the area of Marib, for example, where you have those sympathetic to al-Qaeda who may well be willing to join the coalition forces, yet that would, of course, dismay and perhaps even anger some backers such as the United States, would it not?
Absolutely. The scenario that the Gulf states are using here is one that is similar to the one in Libya in 2011, where both Qatar and the UAE used their special forces as force multipliers for local rebel forces on the ground. So such an operation in Yemen is very similar in that way. The issue, though, is that in Libya at the time, most of the rebel forces were operating on a moral high ground. And now here in Yemen, which is a very, very complex environment, we've discussed it many times on this show, where you have various social, various religious, various political layers and fractions that are fighting each other. And the difficulty is whatever fraction, whatever surrogate you're going to use, whatever proxy you're going to use, this proxy always has a counterpart. This proxy always has an enemy that will fight it. And this is exactly the case with the Southern Movement, because the Southern Movement has a counter movement, which is the people from the Northern Highlands, which is many of the Zaidis, many of the Houthis, and the loyalists of Ali Abdullah Saleh. And to get back to the people of the Marib, again, here we have the problem that the Marib tribes for themselves stand on their own, and they have usually, traditionally, supported Al-Qaeda and other jihadist groups. So inevitably, if you put money, if you put arms into these tribes, you will inevitably support some tribesmen who are loyal to Al-Qaeda or some other jihadist forces, and that will definitely alienate Western states.
Well, Ahmed, Alibrahim, complicating further an already deeply complex situation is, of course, accusations from Riyadh that Iran is backing the Houthi rebels. This is a wider aspect of what is happening in Yemen that Saudi would appear to find a major threat. Some have described it that Saudi Arabia sees what's happening in Yemen as an existential threat to the kingdom itself. Your view?
It's not an accusation, it's actually a fact that Iran is trying to fight a proxy war with Saudi Arabia, and they will not lose Yemen, and they will do everything possible to win that piece of land on the peninsula, and they start to export their thawa or the revolution to the region. It's a very critical thing for them, and Saudi Arabia and the coalition of GCC, they do have the evidence of the personnel and the intelligence forces that has been caught and been killed with the Houthis, and how the Iranian embassy is acting in Sanaa, is acting like the I would say command center for al-Houthis to progress within the war, if they call it a progress within the coalition party. In Saudi Arabia, we've been fighting a proxy war with Iran since 2009, and we showed everything possible to come closer to a safer region, whether in Iraq, whether in south of Lebanon, or in Syria. Saudi Arabia is a global stabilizer when it comes to economy and politics, and they were with the allies, or let's say mention friends, the United States, in order to stabilize the region. And that's put me to the question that I must say with your guests, is what is the role of the United States? Are they concerned about the role of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, or they are with what Saudi Arabia and the GCC country doing in Yemen?
Well, let me put that question to Abubakr Al-Shamahi. What is your view? How does the US view Saudi actions in Yemen at present?
I think the US has always viewed Yemen as Saudi Arabia's backyard. In terms of policy, it always seems to have followed the Saudi lead. Having said that, the Iranian nuclear deal obviously means that the Americans, do not want to anger the Iranians too much. Having said all that, I think many of the criticisms, I'm sure, of the Americans towards the operation in Yemen have been things like civilian deaths, things like, this is essentially bad PR, and the fact that a lot of what the Saudis and the Saudi-led coalition at times are doing contravenes or constitutes war crimes. There are civilians being killed on the ground in various different attacks, and if we look at the general situation, you can even argue that there is an element of collective punishment right now in the north of the country, and certain things that perhaps Western countries, although they definitely have carried out such similar things in their own events in the Middle East, that they perhaps are more liable to seeing that as damaging to the wider operation in Yemen.
Well, Andreas Krieg, your view of that, we did touch on it a little bit earlier, but the damage that the civilian casualties does to the wider effort to secure a lasting agreement within Yemen.
I think we're on the edge of sliding into a counter-insurgency environment, whereby the insurgency is being fueled by civilian casualties, by the humanitarian situation on the ground, and by people being deprived of their very livelihood. I'm not trying to accuse anybody. I mean, fighting such an operation could not be more complex. I think any other Western coalition would have the same difficulty. The thing is, though, that Western countries have a lot more experience in conducting stabilization operations or counterinsurgency operation, which means caring for the social base of this insurgency, and the insurgents being loyalists of Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthiyyin. And this social base needs to be petted. It needs to be supported, and by causing civilian casualties and indiscriminate fire in such an environment, and that will actually exacerbate once they move into Sanaa, that will actually make the situation worse for the coalition to operate. It will be a guerrilla warfare environment once you enter into Sanaa, whereby locals who have been deprived for months, who have already been, if you look at the tweets, if you look at the media, have already a very strong anti-Saudi, anti-coalition sentiment. So the coalition really needs to do anything in order to shape that perception, shape the public opinion on the ground.
Well, Abubakr Al-Shamahi, you mentioned a little bit earlier that the wish would have been that this was a Yemen-led operation. That has not transpired. I mean, how great a danger is there in terms of that social unrest, in terms of creating the insurgency which feeds on the added conflict of the coalition forces attempting to secure the country?
Well, the social fabric in the country currently has been torn apart. When we're talking about insurgencies against any potential outcome to this, there's so many different types of insurgencies we could be looking at. If we look at the south, say the outcome of this current conflict is not in line with many Southerners' vision of the future, there could be an insurgency there now. They had years of a semi-peaceful movement. Now they've picked up weapons. Things have changed. The same in the north. You've had the Houthis who fought 6 wars with the government between 2004 and 2010. These are battle-hardened groups with a strong ideological background and a belief that victory is coming to their group, and that this is a semi-religious war that they're fighting. So there's potential for numerous different insurgencies to be kicking off around the country, and that's leaving aside any Al-Qaeda or any other such groups involvement. The real insurgencies we have to be looking at are the ones that come from the non Al-Qaeda related groups in Yemen.
Well, Ahmed, Alibrahim, given all of this, what is the Saudi endgame? What would they see as a resolution of the situation? It would appear with the ongoing armed conflict at the moment that the diplomatic moves, the idea of getting a negotiated solution, have been set aside at present. What is the endgame for Saudi Arabia in its operations in Yemen?
It's a tough answer to answer all that, but I'm optimistic. I think in the very near future, this is going to be put into arrest. But that doesn't mean that if Ali Abdullah Saleh will go away from the scene, his political party has to be tucked in the new government. They have to include other people that they are fighting on the ground right now in the future government. The winning on the forces on the land, it does not mean that the political parties in Yemen, they will be vanished too. They're going to stay and they're going to be part of the new future Yemen. Saudi Arabia and the led coalition party needs to understand that it's going to be a tough call. I think they are progressing, and they are basically cornering the Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis. And in the near future, hopefully, we will hear the news to end the war or to end the war and stop killing or getting the civilians to be killed, because we have over 2 million Yemenis living among us in Saudi Arabia. We are in the same fabric as your guest mentioned, and we suffer for their suffer, and we are, for their happiness at the end of the day. But we need this war to end as soon as possible. It dragged so much, and it's harmed us so much economically and in any material thing that you can think of. And it's time to stop and do the right thing.
Well, Andreas Krieg, I mean, there has always been division in Yemen since union in 1990. You've had a series of conflicts, but nothing quite as ferocious as what we've seen in this current round. What does it leave? What kind of space would it leave for a post-conflict Yemen, given the divisions that have now been accentuated by this ongoing conflict?
Well, I mean, I have to agree. I mean, generally, what needs to happen is inclusion. there is only a political solution in Yemen, and what the coalition is trying to do right now is trying to induce this kind of negotiated political solution through coercion, through military force, trying to get these loyalists of Ali Abdullah Saleh, get these Houthiyyin to return to the negotiation table and to become part of a political solution. At this moment, the Houthis basically resist any form of political solution that doesn't completely accommodate them. They're unwilling to make any compromise, and that's why a military solution is the only, it's not a solution, but it's a means to get to this political solution. So any time, as you said, as you mentioned before, there's so many different fault lines, so many different insurgencies, they're all popping up now because everybody wants to have a piece of the cake. So the end game has to be one where all these different groups, Islamist, non-Islamist, Houthis, Zaidis, Sunni, Shia, all of the different groups actually come together in Yemen and try to do something that was attempted already in the national dialogue a couple of years back. But this time, the national dialogue needs to be supported by the international community, in particular by the GCC.
Abubakr Al-Shamahi, are we talking about a scenario in which the parties are going to fight themselves to a standstill and coerce some kind of diplomatic solution like that?
That's the hope is that, yes, that will, somehow happen, that we will have some diplomatic solution, political solution, because they realize that they can't win through violence, they can't win simply through war. Yet at the same time, even if there is another agreement, Yemen's history, like the recent history has shown, there are agreements and then one side will simply go back on that, usually the Houthis, or Ali Abdullah Saleh for that matter. Various different sides have often decided that it's more in their interest to fight, and ignoring even the political parties and the leaders of these parties, will, just looking at the social fabric, the normal society of Yemen right now is being torn apart. You're looking at southerners right now who hate the north, especially after the horrors of Aden and the horrors witnessed upon Aden in the past few months. You're looking at families even split between themselves on the basis of their allegiance. And once this, whereas before it was a political difference and there were political splits, you've introduced war into this, you've introduced death, you've introduced killing. People are being accused of being traitors, people are being imprisoned left, right and centre, people are being disappeared. How the country emerges out of this, how Yemeni society emerges out of this, that's the real question, and that's my personal real fear.
Well, Ahmed, Alibrahim, what's your view? What's your answer to the question, how will Yemen emerge from this?
I agree with your guests, what they said. They summed it very well, and I think it's going to come out very well. The difference is this time in Yemen, you have Hadi and Al-Bahah, especially Al-Bahah. He's very much in control and know what's the next day after this war is going to end, what the next day he's going to do. The only thing that what I'm looking is, I want to look more defined, clear message from the Western countries. I do understand that the United States is giving us some intelligence satellite images, leading the coalition in some of the communications and all that stuff. That's good and good. But we need to have more solid moves, because with everything that the West can do to help this war to end, that is going to be faster. Listen, this area is not the best, area, or the coalition are not the best coalition in the world that they know how to do PR. But I cannot stand that we are doing what we're doing for the Yemeni people, and the Western media starts their day by condemning the Saudi-led coalition and show images of people dying, and they actually been shot and dead by the Houthis themselves or Ali Abdullah Saleh people. So I think the future is bright for Yemen, but we need to come as the GCC coalition with a big heart to the Yemen and to try to help the Yemeni people and restore the government. And we cannot be in the middle of the ocean by our ships looking at Yemen and we're just offering some images or some communication devices.
Well, a deeply complex situation, remembering too that some 2,000 people have died, 21 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. My thanks to our guests, Ahmed Alibrahim, Abubakr Al-Shamahi, and here with me in Doha, Andreas Krieg. And thank you too for watching. You can contact us by going to our program page on our website, al-Jazeera.com. You can also leave a comment on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Mike Hanna, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.